now we are on live. So we are on air. So this is 5:01. We will start smoothly for this webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for our speakers who will introduce themselves a little bit later. Thank you for our attendees as well. And I can see that the number of attendees is growing. Maybe just a couple of words of introduction before starting the topic and today's topic about private equity. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm Sébastien Stoitzner. I am the founder and CEO of GenSearch. And to explain the reason why we decided to organize this this webinar is because of the trend that we've seen those last years in the market. So at GenSearch, what we do is building and developing teams for life science and healthcare organizations. And we've really seen a huge trend and increase of private equity backed firms and a number of search mandates, which has grown quite intensively. And I was looking at some figures between 2020 and 2025, the investment in private equity, so the assets under management have been multiplied by 1.7 in general, all industries. But maybe, Lisa, you have figures which are more accurate. And regarding the life science healthcare market, it has been multiplied by 2. So an increase which is higher than the market itself. And so we've seen that there is a need for talents, quite an important one, and then a talent pool which is also limited, because one of the things that a partner in a private equity firm can ask is someone who would have an experience with a private equity backed firm, and the talent pool is quite narrow, so there is the need to go outside this talent pool. So to take people from big corporates or other kind of organizations. And this is where we see that there could be a gap between not only what people know about life in a private equity-backed firm, but also what is a private equity fund, how it works, and the reality behind. And this is the reason why we decided to organize this webinar. So in terms of expectations, it won't be a deep dive into finance of a private equity. Lisa, you won't have to explain us everything about how it works and the carried interest or whatever, or if you want at the moment, but more about having different perspective about regarding what it means for each of you. And for me, it's always about the people we meet. I know the three of you, some from a long time and some other from more recently. But I've learned a lot with the three of you about what this world looks like, what can be an experience. And so I thought that it was interesting to share what I learned with other people, with our network. This is also the culture at GenSearch, a culture of sharing and educating the market, because I can imagine that a lot of people are going to join companies that will be backed at some point by a private equity firm, or there will be a LBO or whatever. So it was the opportunity to do that. So regarding the questions you can use for the attendees, you can use the Q&A channel, and there will be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And now to start, maybe I will let each of you introduce yourself, starting with you, Lisa.
Thanks very much, Sebastian. Lisa Telford. I'm a partner at Montagu Private Equity. We're a mid-cap PE house headquartered here in London, but we've also got offices in Frankfurt, Paris, New York, and Luxembourg. I would say that my job here is an operating partner in the value creation team, but I'm responsible for talent in the portfolio. Thanks.
And maybe a couple of words about what you've done before, how you,
Right.
you came
Okay.
to.
Okay, so unusual, in as much as I spent 20 odd years in operational roles. So pre-MBA, I worked in tech, post-MBA, I worked in media. I held a general management position with P&L responsibility. And then there's a second career, went into executive search and did
What
that
a
for
nice job.
4 years. Yes, exactly. Well, I know how hard the job is, which is why I value you, Sebastian, and your team so much. And then for the last 8.5 years, I've been at Montagu. So it brings together my commercial experience, but also my very keen interest and passion in people and developing talent.
And I had a question about the parallel between Warner Bros. Characters and the people in the private equity world. Is there any convergence about the both world?
I need advance notice of that question. I might come up with an answer by the end of this session.
Good answer. Thank you very much. Michael, if you can introduce yourself.
Good. So thank you for having me today. My name is Mike Reinerson. I've been in business in technology creation and commercialization for almost 30 years now, or a little bit more. My experience ranges from being CEO of private equity-backed organizations to executive vice president of a big public company in Switzerland to entrepreneurial startups, creating something I helped develop in the 3D printing world at MIT, and everything in between. And so, as Lisa said, having a broad background of different kinds of things in different roles has been interesting along the way. And about half of my career has been outside of the US, as you can tell from my accent. I'm from the US. But about half of my career has been outside of the US in doing various things. So currently, I'm on the board of a PE-backed company based in Bordeaux, with the PE company in Paris. And I'm very happy to be here today and share some of my experiences with you.
Thank you very much. Grégoire.
Thanks for having me again, Seb. So I've a career which is really split into two. I've spent about the first 20 years of my career in professional services, whether it's strategy consulting and most of it into executive search and executive assessment, mainly at Korn Ferry International and Russell Reynolds, where I was a managing director in the healthcare private equity practice, and then was lured by one of my clients into the other side, into the dark side, and then joined 7 years ago a PE-backed company in nuclear medicine, actually the largest company in nuclear medicine called Curium. Spent there about 5 years. We grew the company into 3,000 people, 1 billion top line organization. And then the same group of investors or consortium of funds that own Curium asked me to move over to another company that they just acquired, which is called now Perceptive, which is effectively the merger between In Vitro, the preclinical imaging CRO, and what's used to be known as Parexel Informatics, or basically a carve out of Parexel, the largest CRO. And we're effectively a 2,000 people organization globally, working into as an imaging CRO, so supporting biotechs and big pharma sponsors in their in the processing of images in their clinical trials. And I'm the group chief operating officer of the company and reporting directly to the board.
So a move from consulting to executive search to HR in participation of private equity-backed companies, and then in operations as well. So
yeah, exactly. I started as a CHRO and communications officer, and then had the opportunity to do a 6-month stint as the GM of India for that new organization, where we had at the time 750 plus people, and that kind of kicked me into the more of a general management role, which I'm doing now.
Okay, thank you. And certainly you will tell us how philosophy that you studied in the first place help you every day in this world. Okay, thank you. So maybe to start about private equity by itself, Lisa, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what is a private equity fund, how it is structured, life in a private equity fund.
Well, thank you for not inviting me to explain about carry and how that works. That's a relief for everybody on this call, I'm sure. So I can't speak for all PE houses, but I can tell you a bit about Montagu and how we're structured and how we operate. So like I think all PE houses, we have an investment team, investor relations, finance, HR, and IT. I'd say the way that we are different is that for the last 20 years, we've had a dedicated team of full-time operating partners. Initially, they were all generalists and ex-strategy consultants, Bain, BCG, and McKinsey. I was the first person and a high-risk appointment, somebody who didn't come from PE, didn't come from consulting, and I came from an operational background and hired in to do this new role to focus on talent and specifically C-level talent. So, and then we have constantly evolved and iterated that model. So now we have a combination of generalists, and those people are typically people with a consulting background, plus some operational experience. And we also have specialists, people like me who've worked in industry and have a spike, a functional spike. So we've got somebody for commercial, somebody for finance, and somebody for technology. I would say another point of differentiation for us as well is that we've got dedicated origination teams, because finding investments and companies to invest in can take years, and sometimes 5 to 10 years before that company is ready to be to go into private equity ownership, because over 80% of our investments are first time, so they're buyouts and first time under PE ownership. We've also done a lot of carve-outs. So we were a carve-out ourselves from HSBC, and we've now done 31 carve-outs. So I think that would be worth mentioning as well. I think we invest over 5 sectors. A lot of companies, PE houses, are investing maybe in software and very focused on tech. We invest over 5 priority sectors. So healthcare, and that's how we've worked together, Sebastian, because about 40% of our portfolio are companies in healthcare. The rest of it is divided again up in financial sector services, critical data, digital infrastructure, and education.
Okay, thank you. And we in the experience we've had with you, you can be close to the participations or sometimes less close. How, because you can be support and or decided not to be that supportive. How do you work on a daily basis with your participation?
Okay, so from a talent perspective, I always believe pull is better than push. I see my job as supporting both our deal teams and also our portfolio company management teams. Typically, we would get involved always in the chair search and appoint an independent chair. So the chief exec is very involved in that. We don't just appoint a chairman, but also we work with the chief exec to appoint functional leads. So in a carve-out situation, you're typically bringing in new functional leads for HR, finance, and technology, for IT, and quite often product, and more recently in commercial roles as well. So usually it's a big build out from the management teams. When I mentioned earlier about generalists, when we make a new investment, then one of the generalists would work very closely with the CEO to devise the value creation plan, and that's directly linked to the investment thesis. So what do we need to deliver over the next 5 years? I know we're going to come on to that. It used to be 3 to 5 years, but the whole periods are longer now. So what do we need to deliver over that lifetime of the investment in terms of value creation?
Okay, thank you. Michael, so you worked for private equity-backed companies. What surprised you most when you joined those companies, coming from a different environment?
So my first experience was coming from a big public company into a smaller private equity-owned organization that had been a primary buyout. And the point that surprised me very positively was the private equity team was very engaged and extremely knowledgeable, but engaged in a positive way. So they knew the business, they knew the ins and outs of that particular industry, they knew the team that was involved prior to me joining, and they were there every step of the way to assure a smooth handoff. They were there to be a sparring partner. What are you finding? What's new? How can we help you? And That's a bit different than some other situations where sometimes executives are expected to just parachute into a role, and it's more of a Shark Tank, especially in some big companies. It can be quite challenging to come in because now you've got your elbows out in a bigger organization. But in this case, really, everybody is hyper aligned on seeing that the lead team and the CEO in particular succeeds. They don't want to bring in somebody and then have it not work for whatever reason. And so they're on board, they're on point. Of course, people have different opinions, and naturally, part of my role is to dig in and try to find something new or something interesting that they might not have seen from the outside slightly. But mostly it's about working together. And that was a super positive surprise initially. And it's not a one-off. I've seen that in subsequent private equity experiences and other private equity organizations that I've spoken to. Those that are very successful and continuously successful have this mentality. They're there to work together with the lead team. They together are trying to achieve something in a specific period of time, and let's plan it out and let's execute together with focus.
Okay, so a positive surprise on the fact that there was so much collaboration and that it was powerful.
Positive collaboration, and it's super engaged and knowledgeable. So in a negative sense, you can imagine a person who is super engaged, but they don't know anything about the topic.
You mean global positions in a corporate?
Talk about where I'm getting, but I've heard that in people might not know about the topic, and one could imagine that in this scenario where you have an organization with a portfolio of companies, very complex, especially the bigger PEs. They have a huge range of types of companies, and you might think that they would float above that and just sort of point down at the lead teams, but that's not how it works. They're engaged, they have teams, they know what they're after, and as Lisa mentioned, they quite frequently have operators from the past life now in the supporting role. So they know what they're talking about. It's not just academic. And so that's a huge positive. And I think those of you on the call who are interested in becoming a leader, either on a lead team or CEO or somehow engaged in the PE world, expect that, and it's a positive that you will enjoy.
Okay, thank you. And Grégoire, listening to what Michael mentioned, because it could have been a misconception about how a PE worked. In your opinion, what would be the main misconception that candidates could have about this environment?
I think it will sound maybe a bit counterintuitive, but to me, the biggest misconception in my experience in the last 7 years and across 2 companies is that very frequently, actually, the misconception is that execs think that the pressure is going to come from the top, so from the board, from the shareholders, where actually, what my experience is that the executive teams tend to put pressure on themselves, tend to commit to targets that are too ambitious by their own will, because they expect the P funds or the owners or the board to expect that from them, which then leads them to miss the targets, which then obviously leads to a bigger scrutiny from the fund, because as you start to miss your targets, then there's a deep dives going everywhere, and then obviously that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I would say, strangely enough, people may come with the expectation that this is a highly pressured environment with lots of pressure from the funds, but this is not my experience. My experience is that very often it's a little bit the other way around, and that can lead to some issues or some miscommunications. Not saying that you need to sandbag, but because obviously if you sandbag too much, they'll see right through it, because as Michael said, those are very engaged, very committed, and very smart people, very analytical. But this is my experience, at least.
Okay. And Lisa, listening to what Grégoire mentioned, have you experienced that with some leadership team who have put themselves the pressure on them, and that who have exploded, or who needed to be supported to go in the right direction and to release a part of the pressure?
say that sometimes if it's a first-time PE ownership, then there is a tendency, and sometimes it's wanting to, as you say, Gregoire, wanting to over-deliver. It's much better to focus on 2 to 3 things and over-deliver on those, and really be ruthless about the prioritization as it links back to the investment thesis, than try and do 15 to 20 things really poorly, because that is setting yourself up for failure, not for success. And I think in the past, value creation plans have been extremely ambitious, and to you're smiling, Gregoire. I think maybe you've experienced this,
Yes.
and with inexperienced leadership teams, they try and please, and they want to do, to deliver the results, and it's having that experience and confidence and courage to say, no, I'm going to do these things and for these reasons, and I'll get to those things, but I'm doing these first. So it's back to prioritization, as I said earlier.
Okay, thank you. And Michael, thinking about speaking about prioritization, did you face that coming from the corporate world or public company to the private equity world?
So for me, people are very focused and well-run organizations, and I had the pleasure of working for one of the best-run public companies in the medtech space, a Swiss company, and it's incredibly organized, incredibly focused, and just fantastic people throughout. So it's not a given that there's a difference there. Where the difference is in private equity, there's the timeline is front and center of almost everything. And in public companies, there are timelines for projects and timelines for certain evolutions, but it's less distinct. And in private companies owned by individuals or small groups, in some cases, there's no timeline at all. It's just do more or do better or continue doing a good job or whatever the case is. So private equity is quite unique in this regard, in that there's we all try to have a very defined timeline, and we try to have objectives along those timelines. And as my colleagues have mentioned, the hitting those objectives is critical, and getting aligned with a team internally and getting aligned with your partners in the private equity and the banks and whoever else is involved and your suppliers to see that you're hitting those things along that timeline. And this is a big difference, and it might sound subtle, but in fact, big companies in many cases are very quarterly focused, and that's one sort of thing. And private companies, like I said, might not have a timeline at all. But in private equity, you generally know what window you're going for. They've taken money from investors, they've deployed the money, they need to give the money back at some point with a profit. And so that has to be defined generally in some ways. There are variations on that theme, but generally that's how it works. So for me, as a leader in that kind of environment, that's fantastic. That's honestly the best situation. You've got as much clarity as possible. I need to get here by then. And then I can back that timeline in to actions and decisions, and especially actions that we won't take and decisions that we will say no to, as she said, to see that we stay on that timeline. That's wonderful, right? It can't float. You can't be sort of indistinct with your actions and your planning, because it could pull you off of the timeline, or it could take resources away from things that are necessary essentially for that timeline. What I've learned, one more moment, and what I've learned on that is not everybody in the organization understands that all the way down to the shop floor. I always have worked in manufacturing companies in some way, whatever the case is, software, hardware, whatever the case is, or consumables. And it's important that everybody knows that. The amount of understanding, the amount of information may change as you get further and further away from the boardroom, but people need to know that you're on a timeline and that things are going in this direction for these reasons. And so communication is paramount, connected to timeline.
Time is of the essence in this case. And regarding this parameter, did it bring changes in the way you led the organization, in the way you made decision, or did you really feel a change in your life before and your life in this kind of environment?
Absolutely. So in some cases, let's say going back to a public company, in some cases, they're very highly quarterly driven, as I mentioned, and they have their own cadence of preparing themselves, taking decisions, depending on how top heavy the decision making is or how distributed the decision making is. But there's a cadence to how things work there. And in some cases, the company cadence overwhelms everything else, not the outside world, not other things. Okay, very extraordinary events will change things, like the pandemic. But in many cases, big companies have a cadence. Small companies or especially smaller PE-backed companies, if something needs to be changed to take advantage of something or to get back on track, you can get the people together, you can affect the change, you can make the decisions and go. And people would be there to help you. If your logic is good, your communication is clear, it's still consistent with your strategy, then people are ready to go and act with you. And they're not necessarily going to wait for the next board meeting in 3 months to chat about it, and then wait another 3 months to chat about it again and see if your slides are better than the time before. So this aspect of it is quite refreshing. And again, as a leader, clarity is super helpful, so that I can talk to my team and say, this is where we're going for these reasons, and there's no left or right. Let's go forward.
Okay, and having that in mind, Gregor, in your experience, what kind of support a CEO would need from their COMEX and their board in general?
I think it's very different, right? From their board, that's the $1,000,000 question. My experience is that I think a CEO needs a very diverse board with a few experienced non-executive directors, experienced executives who can really both challenge and coach the CEO. I've not seen enough of that. I'm yet to see a truly good PE-backed board, because you have usually too many PE guys and PE people. So very smart, analytical, left brain, knowledgeable, as Michael says, but probably not enough from an experience, like a true feet on the ground experience. So that I would say is what's needed. Shit.
Can hear you fine.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfectly. And so that I think is something to be improved, at least in my experience. And from the COMEX, I think, and especially the HR team, the way I've seen it work very well is when the CEO really knows what he or she doesn't know and really rely on a group of experts. It's very much more a group of experts than in listed companies, actually, and so they can really rely on the subject matter expertise of each person. So in my case, for example, my experience being a chief people officer for a few years with a CEO who knew he had limitations on that, he would really use me as kind of I would call that an external emotional intelligence disk drive, right? So I would basically supplement him for that. But he would be very straightforward with me, saying, look, I cannot necessarily read people, or I cannot necessarily understand, who would be the right person for this role, etc. So he would really rely on me for that. Now, what the HR department and any kind of support function needs to bring to the CEO is to be able to be very fact-based in a private equity setting and translate whatever decision, whatever suggestion into numbers, into return on investment. I got burned the first couple of times reporting to the board or attending the board with being, coming from that more kind of HR, a little bit soft executive search type of environment or consulting environment. And I learned to rapidly move to a much more succinct, analytical, and translatable into financials one way or another. I think that's super important. You need everybody to be an execution machine, but also somebody who can really translate their technical or legal or HR, whatever, requirements or suggestions into a very articulated, financially, driven language.
Okay, so feet on the ground, and then this thing about being fact-based and being able to translate that into financials at some point.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, we were talking about a leadership team, and what traits signal a leadership team that can perform under PE pressure, if there is any pressure?
It's all about perception. I just want to pick.
Exactly.
I just want to pick up on Gregoire's point, because I have to tell you, it cuts both ways. Gregoire is on the inside as well. I'm a linguist by trade, and I'm used to speaking in paragraphs and sentences. I learned very quickly. You better get your bullet points, 3 to 5 bullet points, no more than a dozen words in each bullet point, and get the top 3 that you want to get across. Make sure they're the first. If anybody out there is wanting to be a partner in a PE firm, what I've just told you is pure gold. It will save you a lot of time. Anyway, back to traits. So actually, I think Gregoire and Michael have covered a lot of the things I would have said, but just to reiterate and confirm from my perspective, it's about clarity of vision, mission, and purpose. I think that's never more important than it is now, and make sure it's anchored in the investment case. Make sure that you own and drive the value creation plan, and make sure you're aligned with the board and with the shareholders on that. And it links back to what Michael said about the communication piece, both within the board but also within your own organization. You have to be relentless, because it's all about how you translate that vision into action and execution. You said it beautifully, Gregoire, about the execution machines. It sort of must feel like that at times, but it's about clarity and making the plan real. But also, and you probably come onto this, Sebastian, if you're going to be really successful in a PE-backed company, I think that people need to feel as though they're part of this change. It's not being done to them, and they need to feel as though they're accountable, but also empowered to deliver on that. And that's why it's so important that everybody knows what their role and responsibility is. And I would say to the CEO, its decision-making capability is back to what we said earlier about prioritization, being really ruthless, about how you prioritize. But then the other thing is that you're constantly dealing with ambiguity. So you can't hang around waiting to have all the data. You need to be able to back yourself and back your judgment. And I think, to quote Jeff Bezos, he said about the amount of decisions which are one way, tiny. Most decisions can be a two-way process. I'm not advocating for people, flip-flopping between yes or no and changing the course of direction every week or so. It's not that. It's just knowing that there are very few decisions that you can't come back from. But the most important thing is having momentum and being seen to be driving towards there. As you said, Michael, so beautiful, is having that timeline and being really rigid about sticking to the timeline. I think people talk a lot about agility, and I would say that value creation in a PE situation is all about change at pace. So a final thing I would say probably would be resilience. It's been talked about a lot, but I think that now, with everything that's going on and no sign of it letting up, it's actually a make or break factor in dealing with volatility and being able to navigate through what's happening in the current environment.
And thank you. And when you mention resilience, it makes me think about what you mentioned before about being sure that people are actor of the change. And in coaching, we mention are you object or are you subject? And being sure that people position themselves as a subject and having their fate in their hands and not having the impression that there will always someone who will decide for them. And it's interesting because what we can see with the corporate culture, as they can be a little bit top-down, have given the impression of to the people that they are more object than subject, and then it takes time for them to reinvent themselves and being in charge of. It's interesting to see that sometimes they don't see the space which is around them, and that and the autonomy, the freedom that to operate, and because they are waiting for something from someone else. It's interesting.
Well, building on that, I think part of what all of us have experienced is when you have a multicultural organization or multinational organization, then you have the local, national cultures on top of the corporate culture, and how you communicate and how you align and how people take the space that you're talking about. So in some cultures, even if you define to the team, you are fully free to make these decisions within this box. You can move inside this box any way you want, but that might not be the local culture in society in that area to take that decision themselves. And as a leader, you need to be on top of this. You need to understand that, and the nonverbal communication, the verbal communication, in the hallway communication, read up on the subjects about inter-country cultural differences in decision-making and communication, because especially as a first-time leader, you may misinterpret somebody. You're saying you're free to decide, and the other person is taking that in many different ways in different countries. And so it's a fascinating topic, and actually it's part of these roles that I think we all enjoy. I enjoy, I assume my colleagues here enjoy a lot as well, based on your backgrounds, is the people side of it, and how to maximize their enjoyment for the job, because then they'll do a better job for the job, and what they'll do for the organization in the future. So anyway, the national aspect is important.
And on that, I guess that you have been quite successful, because you're from the US and you have worked mainly for a European company, so for a French company, which can be specific. And this French company had different also sites in Europe. And it seems that you've been able to connect with those people, and for me, you don't sound American, and when I say that, it's a compliment. It's you've been able to adapt to a culture, and certainly to be a bridge between the US culture and the European culture, which is also quite an asset for a company.
I think the first thing in any case is be ready to listen and really be open-minded. So you were asking how do I evaluate the teams, and how do I think about integrating into the organization when you join, either regardless of the organization, but especially in private equity, is I'm looking for people who are also open-minded and flexible and adaptable and all those things we talked about, entrepreneurial, and that has a very broad set of meanings. But if you're going to be successful in international business, especially international PE, you need to check your ego at the door. You need to listen 90% of the time and talk 10% of the time, because I already know what I think. I need to find out what everybody else thinks and then apply that in some interesting way. And you're always going to learn something in this manner, and you'll sort of navigate your way through. And it's amazing how many people mistake their role as leaders to talk over everybody else and drive the organization. Well, in fact, your job is to support everybody else. The organization isn't this, it's that, with me at the bottom here, helping support the rest of everybody be better at their jobs. So that's maybe stereotypically different about me.
I think so.
Spend a lot of time listening and thinking about what people are actually telling me, and then I try to then use that in a positive way to help them succeed in their role. It doesn't mean I don't speak when I need to, just to be clear.
And there is a balance to find, and this is certainly the challenge, because you need to listen a lot, but at the moment you also need to make a decision and to stick to the decision and to stick to the plan, because there is a timeline. So that's interesting to have this thing about listening maybe 90% of the time, but for the 10%, you need to be sure that you go in the right direction.
And I think the further you get away from, let's say strategy is the center of what we're doing, and the further you get down into day decisions, as Lisa was mentioning earlier, you can go back and rethink things the further you get away from the central strategy. Having a strategy du jour is terrible, in my view. Having leadership that is this way, that way, something changes in the world, okay, run this way, then run that way, that the whole organization has a terrible time following. But as you get further and further and further down, then you can revisit things a little bit more frequently. And as she said, don't do this constantly because it's hard to work that way too. But in my view, the further you get from the center, then you have more flexibility to rethink things.
Thank you. Grégoire, so we discussed that during the preparation about the types of people that can thrive in a private equity environments, and maybe not the one you expect or not with the experience that you would think would be the right one.
Yeah, so I think, maybe to take a little bit on Michael's comment, I think healthy ego is really important. I think it's bordering on no ego because you're a shareholder on top of being an executive, which means that all the decisions you make, you're also making for yourself as a value creation, initiative, which means that it doesn't really matter who has the last word or who brings the best idea. You just need to agree on the way forward that makes the most sense, which I think is very different from some corporate environments that I've seen from the outside in, obviously as a consultant, where it's a lot of a fight to get the room, to get the power, to get the investment, because your BU is fighting against another BU or against another department because there's only a finite number of investment, and so this doesn't exist, quite honestly, in a PE environment, which means that the whole political aspects that you need to develop as a skill into a corporate world. So I'm not judging. I'm just stating the fact that all the political acumen that you have in a corporate environment to make you successful is worth nothing in a PE-backed environment, like zero. Which is also very refreshing because, quite honestly, the 30% of your time that you waste in a corporate environment doing politics, you gain it back to do something else. So I think good ego, no politics, people playing political games. In private equity environment, it doesn't work. I think also the whole. I think again back to the point of being fact-based, being very analytical. I think what I've seen people struggle is also when they rely on anecdotal findings. I've seen that very often in commercial profiles. People, maybe from a kind of a little bit classic, old school, commercial profile where, yeah, I've met the clients, I feel good about it, or just relying on a couple of data points and anecdotes that they glean into a seminar. I've recently had a couple of complicated discussions with people actually in my in my company where it's just too anecdotal, right? So but what's the 5-year plan? What's the bookings for the next 5 years? Where does it come from? What's your rationale for saying that you're going to get 5 million with AbbVie next year? Where does that come from? And very often
Intuition.
Too anecdotal, and so I think that tends not to work. So I'm painting maybe a picture that's a little bit cold, and you need to be no politics, no ego, a little bit analytical, cold-hearted, etc. But quite honestly, I think not having too much emotional attachment to those in this environment is really, really very, very helpful. And I think thinking as a shareholder helps you actually navigate all that, because it comes quite naturally when you think, okay, so what's best for me as a shareholder that's aligned with my board and my company.
And on this specific point, how have you been able to manage it, because there could be some contradictions, some conflicts, me as a person and me as a shareholder. Michael, have you experienced that, and kind of schizophrenia here on both positioning?
Well, I think that, first of all, I'm completely 1,000% aligned that politics do not help. And it's one of the first things I talk to the team about is, look, we're all in this together. We're honestly trying to pull in the same direction, and you will be measured and treated extremely fairly based on your objective results. And I will try to make them as objective as possible. Of course, there's some aspect that are subjective, but let's agree on the objectives very clearly, spend the time on that, make sure everybody is on board with that, and then let's go. And if something's wandering off, then let's talk about it. Just, you don't need to play games. There's nothing to do here. You don't need to position yourself or you versus somebody else. Just let's go. We're on the same team. And all the great sports analogies are exactly fitting here. If everybody isn't pulling in the same direction, the team doesn't win. So for me, it's about making this point clear to the team. And I've hired a number of people out of big companies, huge companies, onto my lead teams and further down in the organization. And without exception, they like this point a lot. And of course, they don't believe me at the beginning that, okay, you really don't want politics. You don't want us having some sort of Game of Thrones environment in the background. This is who bubbles up. The reality is that during this period of time, I'm CEO and I'm going to be leading the organization, and we're all going to succeed together. And I'm going to see that you all win. And my job is to see that you individuals win and your families win and the company wins. And I promise you I will do that. But please do not play politics about anything. And after a couple of weeks, they're like, man, this guy's not joking. He really doesn't want politics here, and that's refreshing. And so naturally, of course, there's something, because if you have two people or even one person, sometimes you get the interpersonal things going on. But generally, if you honestly believe that and that's your management style, other people have completely different management styles, and I appreciate that. And they like the tension. They like the tension to create something. You see that in sports as well. The way the coaches treat their players, sometimes it's extremely antagonistic, and that's their style, but that's not me. And I've not seen success or people being really successful that way. So I don't think it's contradictory in fact. I think being fact-based, agreeing on the facts, what are facts, and how are we going to address them, and how we succeed or fail as a group, and then staying to it. And I have to walk the walk. I can't be different than anybody else in the team. And the facts apply to me too. And I can't use my position to override somebody when the facts are inconvenient for me. So I agree with his points, and I would say there isn't a conflict of interest in this case, or a conflictory situation. I think, in fact, it creates alignment.
So there is the alignment about the way you lead and the purpose, and the purpose for a company, and then as a shareholder as well.
Yes, absolutely. And so that's just a further level of alignment. And so in big companies, people are shareholders, but it's different. If you own 0.00000% of the company versus you own a couple of percent of the company as a lead team member or even more, that's a big difference. And it means something to you and your family and others around you. And so you're a bit more engaged to see that this comes to fruition in a good way. And it also creates an owner mentality amongst the shareholders, the employee shareholders, that they're a bit more bought in, and they look at things in a different way. And it's refreshing when you get a bit of pushback about strategy sometimes. Well, Mike, yeah, but I'm a shareholder too, and I think this path is going to be more profitable. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Objectively, you're right. So maybe we should think about that again. So.
Okay, thank you. And Lisa, from the fund perspective, regarding team dynamics and leadership succession, what is your vision on that?
So team dynamics, it's music to my ears hearing everything that Mike's spoken about, because that's exactly what we're looking for from our CEOs. It's not our responsibility. It's very much the CEO is the leader of the company. I would say that the only time we get involved, it would be in a carve-out situation. That's quite common because we're hiring a lot of new people. So it's again in the supporting capacity, supporting the CEO with we use trusted third parties to facilitate and also help with coaching and things like that. Again, it's about what Mike said earlier about we're vested in the success, we're backing that CEO and the management team. So we want to do everything we can to support them. In terms of succession planning, I was really surprised. I mean, for me, it's just the way you do business to be thinking about succession planning. But though I don't know if anybody saw this, the AlixPartners last report. I was astonished to see that less than 50% of PE houses said that they think about leadership succession. We actually do an annual talent deep dive, and it's a board topic as well. So it's something that we do think about a lot and we take seriously. And by the way, that was less than 50%, and for that was regular, aka an annual discussion about it. So I think you have to be thinking about that. And we're probably going to come on to this very soon about the impact of longer hold periods. What does that mean? And have you got somebody who is a wartime general or a peacetime general, and have you got the right people now in the right roles? And what got you here won't get you there, all of those good cliches. But it is true, you have to be thinking about this all the time. Otherwise, I think, frankly, you are missing a trick.
Okay. And yes, you're right. Any comment on what Lisa just mentioned?
No, I'm not so surprised about the leadership succession. I hadn't seen the AlixPartners report, but I think mid-sized companies, mid-sized PE firms, they're probably slightly less advanced than maybe some of the larger funds on that. Might be why.
Yeah, it depends also on the culture. Sometimes we have the impression that it's not just about private equity, but even corporate. About we can replace people easily. So if it doesn't work, we will replace people. The reality is a little bit different, more challenging. Talent pool is quite narrow, and
Something from within always works better than external. I mean, I've seen that time and again. I think if you prepare well your internal succession, at whichever level of the organigram, it trumps people coming from outside in. I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And actually, something I should have mentioned back to team dynamics and the role of HR. I'm really proud that we've elevated the role of HR within our portfolio companies. When I first joined, it wasn't a C-level role. You were lucky if it was C-1, and it was definitely administrative. We had our
generally
HR lead.
reporting to the CFO.
Well, yes, quite. Yes, quite. But we had our HR leaders forum last week. We have a really active community, and it was wonderful to hear people talking in the exchange of learning and best practice, because we've got business people who happen to work in HR. That was the goal, and it's made such a difference. So I would say I'm seeing a real shift in terms of the impact that HR is having across the portfolio, working really closely on the together with the CFO as opposed to reporting into, as Grégoire said.
Okay, thank you. I think we are arriving to our last topic about the current situation. What we've heard about the last month is that the business is not that good in general. So I was at BioEquity in Bruges. It was not a big, how do you say, joy about investment, but it's much more about early stages company. But we feel on the market, and executive search is a good thermometer of what is happening on the market. And those last months, we can see that the level of business has quite decreased. is there something specific now about uncertainty? We mentioned during the preparation call about ESG and those longer holds period as well. What have you observed on your side? Lisa, if you want to start.
Well, I sort of touched upon it with longer hold periods. We're constantly thinking about people, and we have an annual Future Leaders Forum, so we are thinking about pipelining talent, and this year's our 5th year of doing that, where we get high potential people from each of the portfolio companies to come to London and spend time with us. But I think that's one area. But I would say that because there's this recognition that human capital is the #1 value lever, if you're going to drive sustained performance. Back to your point, Mike, about, if you are that sort of command and control leader, I think you can get short-term benefit potentially, but very short-term tactical benefit. I think what we're looking at, and there's a whole raft of reasons why, and also Gregoire's point, what we want to ensure is continuity, and by looking at the internal talent, supporting and developing people, that really minimizes these costly and disruptive hires, new hires, and hiring from outside where there's more risk associated with it. But then, the backdrop of this is, we've got short-term cost and performance pressures. All of us are experiencing that because of the macroeconomic situation. But how do you manage that? There's a sort of tension between long-term strategic talent planning. So I think that's something that we're constantly discussing and looking at. Also, is thinking it's back to resilience of the workforce, because in these longer hold periods, where people have had this sort of idea, after 5 years, then it'll be exit time. And I think it's resetting that and just being very cognizant of the emotional strain it has on people, and not just at the senior levels, throughout the organization, because this sort of constant change is exhausting. EY did some research which I thought was really interesting, and they said in a successful transformation, the pressure, the emotional strain on the workforce goes up by 30%. But if the transformation and the change isn't performing, it goes up by 230%. But both of those stats show you just how much pressure people are under, and being cognizant of that and helping to, well, recognizing it and appreciating what people do on a day-to-day basis. And I think it goes back to what you said earlier, Mike, about communication and being really transparent. So I think, we've all talked about the importance of KPIs and being data-driven, but I think that making sure that HR is front and center and helping with those growth strategies to maximize ROI and how you anticipate and be more proactive. I think PE tends to be reactive, and it's something that I've seen, and I think that's because there's so much risk involved in making changes, and it takes courage and having strength of your conviction. And that's why it's so important that you're working really closely with the CEO and the chairman, because these decisions are not taken lightly. And just as human capital is a value multiplier, it can be a value destructor as well, and destroyer. And in fact, you can destroy a company if you have the wrong people running it.
Thank you, Lisa. Grégoire, have you noticed any changes for talent strategy in the current context?
No, I think the only, definitely, I would totally echo what Lisa is saying about resilience. I think from a talent strategy standpoint, I'm asking more and more to the teams as we recruit from outside or as we promote, to try and identify and assess as much as possible people with that resilience and with that ability to navigate uncertainty and chaos, that's for sure. But also I would say more maybe on a kind of more hardware type of stuff. I think because it's becoming more difficult to create value. You don't have leverage anymore. You can't just play with debt and stuff like that. You need to effectively create value by executing your strategy, which means that having people who are much more execution oriented and deliver is even more important now, and some of the technical skills are obviously also becoming more and more important, because you're going to create value on very specific stuff, and so you need to have more and more specialized skills. Now, obviously, these people ideally they also have that resilience, etc., but you need to put an even stronger emphasis on the technicality of it, and maybe slightly less on the generalist aspect of things, at least to navigate that period.
Technicality.
Yeah, it's critical, I think.
Michael, as a CEO, what is your point of view on the consequences of the timelines, and how have you navigated in those specific environments?
Yes. So as my colleagues have mentioned, communication is critical throughout. And as it becomes clear for whatever reason, and this is not to shift blame or to change the external view of the organization, but to be clear, okay, these externalities have affected us in XYZ ways, and we need to adapt. And our goals are to maximize shareholder value, maximize customer value, maximize value for the employees. And the way we need to do that is going to change now because of whatever. And let's define those, and let's look for alternatives. And hopefully you've had some alternatives lined up already, but some of our recent externalities are so surprising that, okay, you just have to rethink. So that's one. Secondly, the extended time needs to be looked at as an opportunity, because as I mentioned, the timeline before was super critical to everything you do. Now all of a sudden you might have extra time, whatever that is, 6 months, 12 months, a couple of years could even be. It can't be we're going to do the same things we thought we were going to do over a longer period of time. That's not the right answer. The right answer is, what other ways can we optimize the performance of this organization with this extra time? The one commodity that we almost never have is time. So please, everybody, think about it. What else can we do with this extra time? So that side project you wanted to run to be more efficient in manufacturing, it doesn't cost us a dime to think about that. Go do that. Let's get that on the list now. Talk to your customers more than before, because you've got more time to talk to them for whatever reason about projects and other things in the future. Go. And so for me, let's turn it into opportunities, and let's see what we can do during this period of time to be more efficient, because we're going to have to be. If the timeline is getting longer, then the pressure on the returns is getting higher, because the IRR is getting worse because of the timeline, blah, blah, blah. So we need to use this time effectively. And that's going to be different for every organization, big, small, and different for every team. But this has to be communicated also from the CEO up to the board and down to the organization, to please, let's think about this in a different way than we did even recently.
Okay. That's interesting about this thing, which is central about time and the way. There is a question about what are the skills which could be adapted in this environment, and there is something that we don't measure a lot, or that we don't assess a lot about how people not manage time, but the way they look at what time is. This is certainly something that we need to assess more in a recruitment process for this environment. About there is a fantasy about the time, and what the time we have till the end of our career, or the time left, or whatever. So it's certainly some philosophy, Grégoire, can be useful here about how time impacts performance in a private equity company, but more from an individual point of view as well. Okay. Thank you. I see that time is running. Maybe we can look at the questions. So do you have access to the questions? You can read them, or am I the only one? Because there is one for you, Lisa. When a portfolio company does not go so well, or at least not as planned, do you think we prefer the statu quo and does not change the management for costs and risks reason, compared to and wait for the situation to be too bad before engaging significant changes?
I think that really depends. I don't have if I had a silver bullet for that, I would be happy to provide it, but I don't, because it's so context specific, and it's never just one factor. You have to look at things in the round and what the potential implications of making a change and where you are in the investment cycle, because as Mike said, if the whole period is extended, then the IRR is impacted. So if you're quite late in the investment whole period, then it may not make sense to make a change. But it really depends, and it also depends on the function, because if it's a mission critical role and it's really linked to the investment thesis, then you probably would make a change, but it wouldn't be done rashly because of the, as you say quite rightly in the question, the risk that's involved. I don't think we ever prefer the status quo, not when something isn't going well, I would say.
No statu quo. Any comment, Grégoire or Michael?
Well, I probably have a slightly different experience from that, because in the two different companies I've seen, and most lately in this one, I've been surprised actually by the patience, to be honest, and I hope among the different participants nobody can kind of point to a very specific situation, but I've been surprised to see the patience of the board before engaging into some management changes. So maybe one of those misconceptions that people may have is to have this impression that it's a little bit of a kind of trigger happy environment where, you know, somebody doesn't perform two quarters in a row and then, you know, they're gone. That's really not what I've seen. And actually there have been a couple of cases where I've had to insist and put more pressure on the board into thinking, are you sure you don't want to make a change? So it's only, you know, it's only one data point, but I've never heard about, you know, board members being, or PE funds being very quick at changing management. Not in my experience.
Michael, any comment?
I think as both of them said, every instance is completely different persons, different everything. But in my experience, that you need to have your eyes wide open on these situations and really assess the same lead team is under a different set of circumstances now as when they came in. And even though you may have assessed them for blue skies and calm seas, now let's see what this same team can do when the sea is rough. And you may be surprised that that same team, even though they've never exhibited this behavior in the past, they're good at that too. And they need their opportunity to succeed in that case. And if you are too quick about making a change, well, this team has never been through a rough patch, so they might not be able to do it. Well, they need to exhibit that they can and give them the opportunity to, because the cost of changes is enormous. And it's measured in years in many cases. So in my view, even if somebody hasn't had a particular experience, what are they doing now? Who are they now? What experience do they have that is relevant? And are they coachable? Are they adaptable? Are they exhibiting those behaviors that are necessary to succeed even in a rough patch? And then it's better to back the team that you know and the people you know and push on with them than just swap everybody out, hoping you've got the rainy day guy that you brought in from someplace else.
Yeah, and from a headhunter perspective, even if we are happy to have new search assignments, we know that the talent pool can be very narrow as well. So we ask this question about how can you develop the team, because will the market be able to provide you a solution that would be better than the one you have? So in some cases, we are sure that this is we can find someone because there is a large gap in terms of skills. For example, it's not the right experience. But sometimes we can advise, okay, develop your people, because it will be hard to find a plug and play. There is a question about what types of past experiences best prepare leaders and employees to succeed in a PE-backed company.
I'll give you 2 seconds of my opinion. So my opinion is a range of experiences is always helpful. So if you've seen things from different directions, big, small, complicated, India, whatever, I'm interested in interesting people and having people with a variety of backgrounds. They're going to usually be creative and flexible. And that's not to say that there aren't people with an absolutely linear career from day one to the time you meet them in one big company, and that's all they know. They may have fantastic experiences too. But for me, variety brings a degree of refinement that is helpful in the PE world.
Yeah, I think it's not so much the specifics of their backgrounds as more than the ability to adapt to the new environment, because quite frankly, if you're gonna come into this new environment with an idea that you can cut and paste what you've done before, there's 100% chance you will fail, 100%. And so building on that previous experience or previous experiences, but also making sure that you don't just say, okay, I think the biggest blunder I've seen is really somebody who was perfect for a divisional CEO role, perfect experience, everything, and seemed to know exactly what to do, and started each one of their sentences by, I know exactly what to do. And that was probably the biggest failure I've ever seen. So, and that's a really experienced person, very successful in their previous roles. So there's no, cut and paste won't work. But then backgrounds can be so different, depending on the needs.
Lisa?
When I first joined, there was a very high focus on plug and play people, Gregoire, and very focused on the quantitative skills, so track record, which companies, that kind of thing. I would say that that's just the tip of the iceberg, and just because you've been successful in the sector and in a company, there are so many different permutations and combinations of what made you successful, and so we have inverted that, and we're very much focused on soft skills. And did a lot of research into what makes somebody successful, not only in a PE-backed company, but in a Montagu-backed company. So we do know what to look out for, and we know the red flags as well. Do we get it right all the time? Absolutely not, but we are tracking at 80%. So I think we're doing pretty well against the market average of 50%. But you can always be better. So I'm not saying that we've got it down to a T, but I think it's just being really cognizant, and also not just looking at a transactional plug and play with one person, but looking at the makeup of the team and how this person is going to fit with that team. But also, I would say when I'm interviewing people, it was so interesting hearing Mike speak, I'm always interested in people who've worked internationally, because that really is a test to how flexible and adaptable you are. Because I'm a linguist by trade, and I've made such a fool of myself trying my very best to integrate. And I think if you can't laugh at yourself, I would say that's the other thing. So intellectual curiosity, a good sense of humor, but also I think the other experience that I thought was really, you've touched upon it, both of you, is that growth mindset. Just wanting to learn, wanting to develop, knowing that you haven't got all the right answers, but leveraging the people around you and building the team, but also leveraging the experience of the shareholders, because you're right, super smart, no operational experience. And I'm very, the reason I'm still at Montagu is I really like the people. And I would say that the investment people, they steep themselves and really want to understand the dynamics of the market, the business, but they are very, very respectful of our management teams, because they can't do their job. So I think it's that combination of things.
What I learned during the different searches also is this thing about being strategic and operational at the same time. You cannot oppose those things, and the sense of details. I think
Yeah, Sebastian, I actually heard, I've heard from two different CEOs, both of whom are first-time PE CEOs, and one of them described it as dancing on a beach ball, which I thought was wonderful, and the other person said it was a bit like patting your head and rubbing your tummy at the same time, just to give you an idea of the sort of dynamics. So,
and that's true. Actually, that's true. So there is this thing about a sense of details to dive into something when it's necessary, actually. And it's interesting to see amongst candidates whether you recruit for a R&D position or for a commercial position. People are coming from corporates, don't really know what PE is. They have their own experience, and we could expect people with a commercial background that would jump into this thing about being a shareholder, and but this is not the case. There is a common trait which is about being challenged by the board, by the fact that the fund is really close to the participation, and be sure that they can grow thanks to that. It's also there is a thing about willing to be challenged. I think it's part of the success as well. I will mention this one because it's very kind for us. Due to their LP's environment, P often works with Shreks to get a signature on the recruitments. Those Shrek often recruited managers coming from larger corporates with a significant risk on soft skills ability, especially doer and hands-on approach. How to manage to work more with headhunting companies such as GenSearch. This is the reason why I mentioned this is nice. Who does haute couture requirement, real value-added search based on fit. I'm not sure that there is a need to answer, but it was nice to share this one. But maybe there is the thing about the tailor-made approach here on with haute couture on. Be sure that you can mention what you really need and what you so that the headhunter can understand very well the requirements and doesn't lose himself.
can I say something, Sebastian? Because we've worked with you a lot. I really think it's about the individual, not the name above the door, and how well that person really understands the market, the people, and takes the time to really understand the PE house and our requirements. And that's why you keep getting so much business. But I work with both, so it just depends.
Okay. What else do we have? When selecting a company to invest in, is there a notion of appropriate value at the start of the road? I am naively assuming that a too good, too structured, too efficient company would not offer enough growth perspective, while a too bad company would appear just too bad. So maybe this is in between about the target, about value creation.
I think to be clear about at which stage of the journey that the company is. Like, is it the first time buyout? Is it like the third, fourth time that it's been kind of flipped? And really assessing during those conversations with obviously the consultants and then the board and the chairman, CEO of the company to understand really what's the value creation plan, what's the equity story for the next round. I mean, you don't necessarily need the next two rounds, but what you need to know is what do we sell at the end of that cycle, because effectively the value is going to be profitability times a multiple, and the multiple is based on a lot of different things, but basically growth, customer centricity, or customer concentration, and a few other things. So you can create value on any kind of situation, whether it's a first time, obviously first time LBOs are really sweet. They're nice. They're very nice. Turnarounds are tough, but they can create a lot of value. Now it's the third, fourth time, then you really need to be sure about the strategy and what's next, because they could be absolutely a new geographical expansion, a new service line expansion that absolutely makes it. But taking the time, I think sometimes I've seen people not take enough time. Just the same as we are due diligencing candidates, candidates should due diligence the company. And I think they sometimes don't do that.
Absolutely. That should be number one. If I'm looking at an opportunity, I'm doing a deep dive on everything I can read and find in interviews on the web. And what did the past CEOs say? What did the founders say? I mean, just dig in deep and learn as much as I can. And sometimes it's enough. But in building on what you were saying is that there are also certain people that enjoy certain things. So some people love that initial transition from founder to PE back. And that transition requires a certain personality, a certain skill set, most often cleaning things up, professionalizing things. Not that the company was bad, but it just needs a polish to then function better. And then when it's through the second cycle or third cycle, then it's a different set of skills. And some people are going to enjoy that more or less as a leader or a lead team member in those situations. The absolute amount of money you as an investor could make might be identical in both of those, or even more later on when the company's more polished because of bolt-ons, new technology, new market expansion, whatever the case is. So I wouldn't take it for granted that it's quite as black and white as described in the question. I realize it's a very quick question, so no worries. But every situation is different, and it's a great conversation point to have with whoever's interviewing you for the role. Say, okay, help me understand what's the value creation in your thesis. How do you plan to get to an exit? What does that mean? What's going to happen after the exit? What does that trajectory look like? And is this opportunity right for me? And to be fair to everybody involved, if it's not what you love to do, then you should disengage as a candidate too. I don't know what that's all about, but anyway, it's very far away.
That's spectacular.
Awesome point. So here we are. Anyway, so it's really important to think about the role you're applying for, and if it's something you love and you're passionate about, then you'll give 200% for it. If it's not really your thing, if you love just tinkering to make the company super efficient, although it's stable, that's a different mentality, and you may find more success elsewhere.
Actually, we don't want to make mistakes. So what we try and do is we're definitely sellers as much as buyers, and often we're more selling than buying. And so when we get to the final stages, we will do it under NDA, obviously, but we will share, and we want people to be testing and asking those questions. So we show everything because it's in everybody's interests.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay.
You definitely don't want the lead team to be surprised when they walk in the first day and say,
No, but yeah, I tell you, the number of people that I've interviewed in my career who reckon they've been missold or it wasn't what they thought, and yeah, we try very hard for that never to be the situation. So
I think in all levels, clarity and being forthright is just the way to go. And if they don't like it or they don't agree, then okay, their choice is to discontinue the process. But thinking you agree and then getting involved, and then it's really not the thing, or somebody withheld important information, it's not fair from the other side. So
Thank you. And maybe a last question, to the same question to each of you, with a short answer to conclude the webinar. A piece of advice you would give to someone who would like to join the PE ecosystem? Who wants to start?
ladies first, as usual. So
piece of advice. Well, from my own personal experience, I wish I'd discovered PE when I was younger. I would have loved to have worked in a PE-backed situation. I worked in US corporates and then a French corporate, and I love the clarity and the fact that you are able to make decisions as long as it makes business sense. And it's all about results and delivery. So if you can back yourself, I think there's no better place. But there's nowhere to hide. So it's not for the faint of heart. If you like the comfort of sort of the velvet cage of filling out templates and being part of a US multinational, this is not the environment for you. So the pace is relentless. I describe it as an ultra marathon interspersed with regular sprints, even though I'm the least sporty person you could imagine. But you need to be comfortable with ambiguity, and you need to be really resilient, as we've talked about before. But I would say, you need to be able to accept the fact you don't have all the answers, and surround yourself with great people. I think it's a mistake that sometimes people make, that they think they can be the person who does it, but everybody matters, and it's about building that high-performing team. That's the only way you're going to really be able to deliver what's required.
Thank you, Lisa. Who's next?
Well, no, I mean, very, very briefly, just reiterating one of my comments earlier, which is to try and learn how to translate strategy, business, execution into financial terms. I think this is really, it's the universal language of PE. The moment you do that, you speak the same language, and everything is really, really easy. And it's not necessarily easy depending on your background and your education, and but trying to force yourself to do that is a very efficient way into the PE world.
Okay.
And once you're in there, it's you usually don't get out. So.
Michael?
Finally, for as an executive in a PE-backed company, I think first advice is go for it. I think if you haven't been in this world, you should give it a try, see if it's for you. It is exactly what my colleagues have described. It's focused, it's high energy. The teams you work with are almost universally world-class in terms of their capabilities, their mentalities, the resources they have. They will invest, and they will double invest when they see success, and they will keep investing and keep pushing. Almost, again, universally, when they see something's working, they're going to get even further behind it. That's exciting. It builds additional energy. There's no BS, as my colleagues have said as well. So you'll have much less politics than you might have experienced in past roles, and there's hyper clarity, which is for me as a leader, and for you as leaders as well. I think you'll enjoy that. And so get in, have a great attitude about it, be flexible, be open-minded, work hard, and it's amazingly rewarding.
So maybe that can be the word, the ending word. Go for it, experience it. That's a positive message that we can give to people. So thank you very much, Lisa, Grégoire, and Michael. It was great to have you in this panel and to have these discussions, which was for me open, transparent. Thanks a lot for your insights. So there will be a replay available in a couple of days, certainly on our website. Thank you to our attendees as well, and talk to you soon.
Thank you, Sebastian. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.